Act 4, Scene 1. The scene takes place in Friar Lawrence's cell and opens with the friar talking to Count Paris. Paris has informed the friar that he wishes to marry Juliet on Thursday in accordance with Lord Capulet's plans. The friar, having already married Romeo and Juliet, attempts to discourage Paris by portraying his plan as hasty and ill-advised. Paris explains that Juliet's father wishes the marriage to happen quickly to cure Juliet of her depression. As a married woman, she would be forced into greater social interaction, which would take her mind off her sorrow. At this point, Juliet visits the friar's cell for advice. Paris addresses her as though they are already married, and Juliet curtly points out that they are not married yet. Over the course of their exchange, Juliet displays no affection towards Paris. Annoyed by her self-possession, Paris makes clear that once they are married, Juliet will belong to him. Friar Lawrence, seeing that Juliet wishes to speak to him, pretends that he must hear Juliet's confession, and Paris excuses himself. Once alone with the friar, Juliet desperately pleads with him to help her. She is already married to Romeo, and would rather die than marry Paris. She shows the friar a knife, seems similar to what Romeo just did in the last act, and to demonstrate her determination to kill herself if he cannot come up with a solution. Friar Lawrence says that he has a solution, but it's similar to death, and asks if she is brave enough to try it. Upon hearing her say yes, Friar Lawrence hands her a vial of potion and tells her to go home and give her consent to the wedding. On the night before the wedding, she must drink the potion, which will send her into a trance similar to death for 42 hours. The wedding thus stopped. The friar will then contact Romeo, and both Romeo and the friar will rescue Juliet from the vault where she is buried. She and Romeo will then flee to Mantua together. Juliet eagerly agrees to the friar's plan and takes the potion home with her. Let me know, would you want to be buried alive for someone you love? Act 4, Scene 2. It is Tuesday evening, and the Capulet household is busy preparing for the wedding that's to take place on Thursday. Lord Capulet is instructing servants to invite the guests and employ cooks for the banquet. Juliet arrives home from Friar Lawrence's cell and announces that she regrets her bad behavior and is now willing to marry Count Paris. This news delights her father, who immediately decides that he's got good news for her, too. He's going to move the wedding forward one day to Wednesday. That's tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. Juliet, feigning cooperation with the plans, asks the nurse to accompany her to her room to help choose the clothes in which she will be married. Lady Capulet, sounding a note of reality, protests to her husband that there will not be enough food and drink prepared if the wedding is moved to Wednesday. However, in his overexcited state, Lord Capulet dismisses these concerns, saying that he will look after everything. Failing to locate any of his servants, he resolves to call on Count Paris himself to deliver the good news of Juliet's consent to the marriage and the fact that it will now take place tomorrow. Act 4, Scene 3. The scene opens on Tuesday at night time, with Juliet and her nurse in Juliet's bedroom, choosing clothes for the wedding. Having selected her clothes, Juliet asks the nurse to leave her to sleep alone in her room, as she has many prayers to say. Lady Capulet arrives to offer help, but Juliet tells her that everything has been sorted out. Asking to be left alone, she suggests that the nurse should stay with Lady Capulet tonight, as they no doubt have many tasks to attend to. As Lady Capulet leaves, Juliet wonders to herself if she will ever see her family again. In a moment of doubt and fear, she calls for the nurse, but immediately she silences herself again and resolves to go through with her ordeal alone. Considering the vial of potion, Juliet wonders what effect it will have when she drinks it. She worries that it might not work and that she might have to be married to Paris after all. Then she remembers that she has a knife with which to kill herself if that happens. She briefly considers the possibility that Friar Lawrence has secretly given her poison that will kill her to conceal his role in marrying her to Romeo and thus maintain his reputation. However, she recalls that the friar is a holy man and dismisses this notion. Juliet then imagines waking up and being trapped in the vault before Romeo can come to her rescue, with the various horrors that would surround her there. Her imaginings conjure up the ghost of Tybalt, seeking revenge upon Romeo. This apparition finally frightens her into action, and she drinks the potion. This is an important scene because it shows the evolution of Juliet from the child to an adult. This is the first time we see her making a decision that is an adult decision to go forward with her plan to be with Romeo. Act 4, Scene 4. This is a very short scene, but it does show the characters in a different light. It takes place in the hall of the Capulet household, and it's the night before the wedding, almost dawn. All is a bustle and chaos as the servants rush around, getting everything ready for the banquet. Lord Capulet, in merry mood, gives out orders and insists that no expense be spared in the preparation of food for the guests. Long far cry from, "I never want to see you again and you can live in the street, huh?" Lady Capulet tries to persuade her husband to get some rest, warning him that he'll be exhausted the next day. Lord Capulet dismisses his wife's advice and continues to dispatch commands to the servants with gusto. Suddenly, aware that the day is breaking, Lord Capulet hurries everyone up and claims that he hears Count Paris approaching. He commands Lady Capulet and the nurse to go and wake Juliet. He is anxious that they start to prepare for her for the wedding, as it will soon be the big moment. Act 4, Scene 5. It's now early on Wednesday morning, the day that Juliet and Paris are due to be married, and the nurse has entered Juliet's chamber to wake her up and get her ready. When Juliet does not stir, the nurse becomes distraught and, believing her to be dead, frantically calls for Lord and Lady Capulet. Lady Capulet is grief-stricken and begs Juliet to come alive again. Lord Capulet, upon seeing the apparently dead Juliet, is choked up with grief and can barely speak. Just then, Friar Lawrence and Count Paris arrive for the wedding. Lord Capulet breaks the news to Paris, who laments that instead of seeing his beloved's radiant face, he is now staring at her lifeless features. Amid the continued expressions of grief from Lord and Lady Capulet, the nurse and Paris, Friar Lawrence interrupts to urge some restraint and calm. He points out that wailing is not going to do any good, and that as a child of both heaven and earth, Juliet has now been summoned to eternal life in heaven. The friar continues that Juliet's death is the ultimate advancement, and that as parents and guardians who wished for her to marry better than herself, they should be happy for her now. He also says that marrying and dying young is preferable to a long, disappointing life in marriage. He then directs the family to dress Juliet's corpse and bring her to church for the funeral. Lord Capulet sorrowfully observes that all the preparations that had been made so joyfully, from his point of view, made for the wedding, are now to be employed for a funeral instead. As the family leaves for church, the musicians who have arrived with Paris remark that since they are no longer needed, they may as well pack up and leave. Peter the servant requests the songs, but is refused. Offended, he makes disparaging remarks about the musicians, which they return in kind. After a brief exchange of witticisms and wordplay, Peter leaves the musicians, who decide to stay until the mourners return so they can at least avail of a free dinner. I like to believe that Shakespeare put this in because, remember, a tragedy back in this time was unheard of, and I think he felt that the scene was so wrought with emotion that he needed some levity, and the fight between the Peter and the musicians was just what Shakespeare wanted.